former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
2019, it was a very good year. Or was it? Welcome into our special year-end edition of Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America network. Today, we look back at the year that was and ahead to the year that will be. Amidst the chaos of the most divided period in American history since the Civil War. Can we unite, or will the balkanization of the United States carry on unabated? And what were the biggest victories and defeats for liberty in this past year? We'll play you what I call maybe the best, maybe the wackiest or most deranged, but certainly the most revealing sound bites of 2019, and bring in two people who watch the goings-on in this nation very closely. My far, far, far better half, and editor-in-chief of the rapidly growing LibertyNation.com, Leesa K. Donner. Welcome, Leesa.
Thank you, Tim.
And our regular contributor to the show, and who, as legal affairs editor, stands as our guardian of individual liberty at LibertyNation.com, Scott Cosenza.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Hello, Scott.
Hi.
All right. Now, lady and gentlemen.
Oh, thank you.
Let's start with the question I addressed in this opening, and I think it's no longer being overdramatic in this political climate to ask the question, are we already in a cold civil war, and could we be headed for a hot one? Now, Leesa, you are the editor-in-chief, so you get your pick. You can go first or last.
I think we have been in a cold civil war for some time, and I think it's heating up as we speak. I sat at a Christmas ladies' lunch between two lawyers, and they were saying, how can you impeach somebody on no crime?
There's no crime alleged in the articles of impeachment, neither one of them.
Right. And so I think it's just offending people.
Scott?
We sit in the Commonwealth of Virginia where right now there is a cold civil war, and it's turning hot with respect to the Democrats, the newly elected Democrats' attempt to seize the guns of Virginians. They are pressing gun confiscation and gun controls this Commonwealth has never seen. And if they succeed, I fear we will go from cold to hot.
Cold civil war, hot civil war. We've laid that predicate down for the political climate we're in. And
what do you think?
My feeling is that we've been in a cold civil war since 2016, specifically November 9th, the day after the 2016 election, when they declared that they'd do everything to take this guy out of power no matter what. And it's gone on unabated. I mean, they haven't stopped for 3 years. They were looking for anything to impeach. They've tried everything from the Logan Act to the Emoluments Clause to the 25th Amendment. They tried the firing of Comey, Michael Cohen, Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels, all this stuff. And then finally it's a phone call to a Ukrainian president, which I'm sure they thought would never be released.
On CNN, when they unveiled the poll today, the president has gone up like 6 points, and they were flabbergasted.
They can't understand how a president who's being impeached could go up in popularity. But, Scott, we've been talking about this for the longest time, that the impeachment was a suicidal politically suicidal march for the Democrats, and now they're about to find out. So let's start with Donald Trump himself. We'll move on to the Democrats. We'll move on to stories that affect individual liberty. But let's start with Donald Trump. 3 years in office. How's he doing, Scott?
We have no new wars. We have Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I think that's an A+ right there.
I noticed you didn't say Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, that's because I'm not a huge fan of Justice Kavanaugh.
And what distinction do you draw between the two Supreme Court nominees of this president, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch.
Deference to federal authority versus supremacy of individual rights. And I see that Justice Gorsuch is all about individual rights and the pledge to defend same that is in our founding documents. And when I look at the jurisprudence of Kavanaugh, I see some respect for that, but more interest and respect for the powers that loom large over those rights. And so I'm much more skeptical of him.
Well, going back to your original question, how is Donald Trump doing? I see it as promises made, promises kept. I mean, he said, I'm going to be the greatest jobs president, and he is. Despite a lot of back and forth, they are building the wall. I mean, the wall is being built.
But I'm not so sure if the wall's being built, Leesa, or whether the walls are closing in on President Trump.
Feels like the walls are closing in on the White House. It feels as if the walls are closing in here.
I think the walls of justice are closing in on President Trump.
Increasingly desperate, feeling like the walls are closing in. The president clearly feels all the walls closing in on him in terms of the Russia investigation.
The walls are closing in. I think at this point, the walls are spinning. It does feel like the walls are closing in, but I think that the administration at this point can start to see the walls closing in.
He feels the walls closing in on him.
So that's really the narrative that we got from the media all year, that Trump was just this close to being impeached and kicked out of office for any number of crimes he might have committed.
I wonder if on the left anybody has an original thought. What I've really noticed this year is that it's almost like the media has talking points from the Democratic Party. Something happens and this is explosive, that is explosive, this is explosive.
It's all explosive, Leesa.
Right. And now the walls are closing in, and it's just a lot of repetition.
I don't know that you can give Donald Trump a win for the wall. I think that, for the promises kept situation, I mean, I'm not saying he hasn't done what he can to keep that promise. Yes. But to call that a win for the administration, I think maybe.
Well, I think I'm saying he made that promise and he's doing everything he can to fulfill that promise. And when a politician does that, that to me is very impressive. Mm-hmm. They haven't. The only thing he seemed to backtrack a little bit on was guns. It's almost like he is. He's in a confused state, and then he talks to somebody like Wayne LaPierre, and then he backtracks. And
it was the worst moment of his presidency when he declared so many thousands of Americans as instant felons with a stroke of his pen by banning bump stocks.
Right. Now, let me take you to what I think is one of the high moments of his presidency, which was considered a low moment around Washington, which by itself made it a good moment. And that was when the president refused to leave our troops and commanders in harm's way in Syria when an imminent attack was coming from our NATO ally, Turkey. And this is endemic to the swamp, this reaction from Mitt Romney, among other neoconservative Republicans and Democrats, when he said, I don't want to keep our troops in harm's way. We're not going to allow them to be killed with this onslaught. This is the kind of thing he was up against.
The decision to abandon the Kurds violates one of our most sacred duties. It strikes at American honor. What we have done to the Kurds will stand as a blood stain in the annals of American history.
And Trump's response to that was, as usual, common sense.
Why are you siding with an authoritarian leader and not our Kurdish allies?
Well, I'm not siding with anybody. We've been in Syria for many years. Syria was supposed to be a short-term hit, just a very short-term hit, and we were supposed to be in and out. That was many, many years ago, and we only have 50 people in that area. That's a small sector, and I don't want those 50 people hurt or killed or anything. I don't want anything bad to happen to our people, and I told that to President Erdogan. I said, don't hurt any of our people get hurt. Big trouble. They could suffer the wrath of an extremely decimated economy.
So there's the Trump foreign policy. Strength through the projection of a military through a military budget that's increased substantially, but a real reluctance to use American military to intervene in foreign lands. This is a fundamental change, and I think it happened, I'm hoping it happened, in that moment where he refused to let those soldiers, American military, stand in harm's way.
Well, we certainly need less war, not more war, and I think that our entanglements that we've gotten into in the past decades have not proven to be advantageous for us, but detrimental to us and the liberty of us and other people around the world. So to get less of that, Tim, is a boon for liberty and another reason why Trump has been a good president.
It seems to me that Mitt Romney has picked up John McCain's mantle and decided to run with it. You know, whatever the president wants, he needs to oppose. And this seems rather important to him. And it's really sad because I think he comes out kind of as a very little petty person.
Indeed.
And I hadn't really thought of Romney in the same way that I had McCain in terms of pettiness.
And he is emblematic of the Washington establishment and the commitment to doing things the way they've always been done, both domestically and in foreign policy. All right, we're going to take a quick break, come back with a continuation of our year-end special on Liberty Nation Radio as we focus on impeachment.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And we are back on our special year-end edition of Liberty Nation Radio. And, of course, the only story that you've heard much about, if you're watching the elite media over the last, month or two, is impeachment.
I think there's one policy area which we haven't discussed. We're going to leave Donald Trump's accomplishments without mentioning. We would be remiss, which is a little reported on fact that he is modifying the Code of Federal Regulations by ripping out all kinds of burdensome chapters, which are unvoted on laws that people in all sorts of areas of the United States have to basically follow. And if they don't follow it, they're subject to massive fines. It's really a cancer on all kinds of economic activity and others. And Donald Trump has been a shining example of what a president can do who recognizes this burden and starts to try to remove it from Americans.
Right. Again, though, it's promises made, promises kept. He said he was going to do that.
Yeah.
Actually, he's well exceeded his promises because he promised to eliminate 2 regulations for every new one, and it's closer to about 10 to 1 now. The deregulation has been spectacular. But this is all part of a Trump presidency that the Democratic Party has done everything to subdue and that the media has done everything to make sure that the American people don't find out about. This part of the Trump presidency, the economy, the jobs, the deregulation, the entrepreneurial climate that's been created in these 3 years of the Trump presidency. What the Democrats have been intent on, as we all know, for the last 3 years plus, has been impeaching this president. And I thought that this one soundbite of Adam Schiff, otherwise known as Adam Shiftless in some circles, how he took that phone call between Trump and Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and perverted it in a public forum, in a House hearing, and he translated the call for us this way, providing a precursor of everything that followed.
We've been very good to your country, very good. No other country has done as much as we have. But you know what? I don't see much reciprocity here. I hear what you want. I have a favor I want from you, though. And I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand lots of it. On this and on that. I'm going to put you in touch with people, and not just any people. I'm going to put you in touch with Attorney General of the United States, my Attorney General, Bill Barr. He's got the whole weight of the American law enforcement behind him. And I'm going to put you in touch with Rudy. You're going to love him, trust me.
Now, that was presented in the opening statement of the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and it wasn't until 10 minutes later, under Klieg-like questioning, they admitted, okay, well, it was kind of a parody. And I guess we should have known when we heard that what was going to follow.
Adam Schiff has behaved in exactly every way you would expect some sort of cartoon villain to behave, not a person who is approaching the alleged crimes or misdeeds of a president in a sober and a regretful way, that in terms of something that must be done, like we've been sold. The moving of the goalposts with when a person can submit a whistleblower claim alone, Tim, besmirches the entire process as far as I'm concerned.
Leesa, what do you think when you hear the name Adam Schiff?
I unfortunately think of someone who has a great deal of trouble with the truth. I think what's happened with the Democrats is they've underestimated the American public. The American public does not like when things are shoved down their throat. And I think this whole process with Schiff leading the band is sort of making Americans angry. And I think that's shown up in the CNN poll.
Well, in most of the other polls where impeachment has been dropping in popularity on a really almost a daily basis as we close the year here. But to tie together a couple of things that the two of you said, Scott, you talked about the need to be sort of sober and regretful, and Leesa, you talked about twisting the truth. You put those together and you get Nancy Pelosi acting as if she was so sad to have to culminate her 3-year impeachment crusade.
We take this to be a very sad time for the American people, for our country. Impeaching a president or having the investigation to impeach a president is not anything to be
Get it out.
Joyful about. I don't know that anybody's joyful, but it is a sad time.
Yeah. Is there a single person, Scott, in the whole country, not to mention in either party, that actually believes what she just said?
No, she's a politician, though, so that's par for the course.
I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now, right after the election, Nancy Pelosi doesn't say quietly to somebody, "I told you so."
Okay, so we have covered Trump and the Democrats. We've talked about impeachment, but we're going to talk more about the Democrats' presidential field and whether anybody in that field can beat Donald Trump. And as we continue our year-end special on Liberty Nation Radio, we'll take that on when we return.
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plan deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth. Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And we are back on our special year-end edition of Liberty Nation Radio. Tim Donner with Leesa Donner, Editor-in-Chief of LibertyNation.com, a fast-growing, explosively growing website, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor and guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza, and we'll get to him with the victories and defeats for individual liberty in 2019. But of course, so much of the energy behind this impeachment push has come from the media. I've said to you, Scott, I'll say it to you too, Lisa, this impeachment could not have happened without a compliant media that was carrying the water for Democrats. I'm just picked one soundbite that's emblematic of this. This is F. Chuck Todd of Meet the Press, NBC.
I don't say this lightly, but let's be frank, a national nightmare is upon us. The basic rules of our democracy are under attack from the president. We begin tonight with a series of admissions by the president that all but assures his impeachment in the House of Representatives. It's a moment of truth for Republicans, and they've been largely silent on what we've seen from the president. Today, he publicly called on 2 foreign governments to interfere in the presidential election by investigating his chief 2020 political rival.
So there you go. I mean, there's the hysteria. A national nightmare is upon us.
All right, but Chuck Todd, all you need to know about Chuck Todd is the same thing you know about George Stephanopoulos. These are Democratic operatives. These are not journalists.
Well,
these are Democratic operatives with a big microphone.
What it is the accumulation of the thousands and thousands of messages. Like you could take Chuck Todd away from it, but if you want to sell soap, you put a soap ad on every 20 minutes. You're going to increase soap sales, and that's what these anti-Trump ads have been. From every newscast, from the local news to the national news, they're selling that impeachment and have been for years.
Lest we forget, there is a presidential race.
I did forget for a second.
Yeah, it's easy to forget with impeachment and the IG report and everything else. But I thought I would pick out a single soundbite to demonstrate or exemplify the basic insanity of the Democratic debates. This isn't actually from a debate. This is actually an interview with the dearly departed Beto O'Rourke talking about Trump. And it's all you need to hear about the tenor of the early days of the Democratic primary.
President Trump, perhaps inspired by Goebbels and the propagandists of the Third Reich, seem to employ this tactic that the bigger the lie, the more obscene the injustice, the more dizzying the pace of this bizarre behavior, the less likely we are to be able to do something about it.
Does that leave you breathless? I mean, it still does, even though I've heard it over and over again.
Tim, perhaps inspired by Adolf Hitler, Beto O'Rourke decided to denigrate somebody who wishes for more freedom for Americans.
What's your visceral feeling, Lisa, when you hear a soundbite like that accusing Donald Trump of essentially being a mass murderer?
I just can't take anybody seriously who says on national television that he's coming to take guns away from law-abiding Americans. So that, to me, tells you all you need to know about Beto.
Hell yeah, he's going to take your guns away. He said it, and that's the soundbite of the year for you, Scott. Is
gun salesman of the century.
Gun salesman of the century, making Obama during his presidency looking like a piker. Huh? Now, speaking of Barack, okay, as this Democratic primary got completely out of hand with talks, with social justice warriors going nuts, Julian Castro at one point calling for reproductive justice for transgenders. Now, I know, Scott, I keep bringing that up, but there's the absurdity. Reproductive justice for people who can't reproduce. That's
the height of virtue signal. You have to respect it for that. That is the height. Yeah, it's actually like the best thing he could possibly say. There's no topping it, Tim.
There really isn't.
Yeah.
But in the height of all this, the 44th president of the United States, Barack Obama, acting as the adult in the room, saw all of this insanity going on in these Democratic debates, and he tried to jump to the rescue.
You know, this idea of purity and you're never compromised and you're always politically woke and all that stuff, you should get over that quickly. The world is messy. There are ambiguities. Yep. People who do really good stuff have flaws. Right. That's not activism. That's not bringing about change. You know, if all you're doing is casting stones, you know, you're probably not going to get that far.
Picking up the mantle of being the adult in the room. Somebody's got to be.
I think the interesting thing about Obama is how he's been so not for Biden.
It's true. I mean, on the other hand, I will say I think that's a bit overplayed because you've got 29 people who've declared for president on the Democratic side. To pick one person, even if he was your vice president, on the other hand, it's clear from behind-the-scenes reporting that he's at a low level of enthusiasm for his former vice president.
But we know that the Dems are, I think Barack Obama does enjoy a certain amount of popularity among the American populace. And he could really be a difference maker for Joe Biden. But he is fence-sitting big time.
Well, it could be that his wife will wind up running for president here. But what about Donald Trump and his attitude about Joe Biden?
What does white privilege really look like? Weeks after Joe Biden visits China as vice president, his son secures a private billion-dollar deal with the Bank of China. After Biden is named America's top diplomat to Ukraine, his son joins Ukraine's largest private gas producer with no relevant experience and lands another $1 million deal. And before Ukraine's top prosecutor can investigate the shady dealings of Biden's son, he gets the prosecutor fired, then brags about it.
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Instead of another failed presidential witch hunt, House Democrats should investigate one of their own, Joe Biden. Great America PAC is responsible for the content of this message.
Joe Biden. I picked that ad partly because I love that guy's voice. He's got like 18 kahunas. But part of it, too, is because there's the whole story that Trump's going to be using against Biden going forward here in 2020.
Right, but it's funny that this is what the Democrats are accusing Donald Trump of, cronyism and this kind of stuff. And Biden is really the poster child for it.
Tim, everybody who's vetted this transaction has come to the same conclusion. There was nothing wrong. All the I's were dotted and the T's. I don't know why you keep turning back to it.
Look,
it's purely a coincidence that Mr. Biden was compensated by this Ukrainian oil concern.
Maybe Hunter Biden has some hidden experience in the oil industry or the energy industry or in Ukraine that we're not aware of.
Because he's on the board of Amtrak.
I think the Delaware's had self-serve gasoline stations for quite some time, Tim.
That's very good. Now, of course, Biden was asked to respond to this in a debate. Yes, in the one time I think he was asked by mainstream elite media reporter during a debate, Anderson Cooper sort of buttonholed him about his son.
If it's not okay for a president's family to be involved in foreign businesses, why was it okay for your son when you were vice president? Vice President Biden?
Look, my son did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong.
Your son, Hunter, today gave an interview, admitted that he made a mistake and showed poor judgment by serving on that board in Ukraine. Did you make a mistake by letting him? You were the point person on Ukraine at the time, if you can answer.
Look, my son's statement speaks for itself. My son made a judgment. I'm proud of the judgment he made. I'm proud of what he had to say. And let's focus on this. The fact of the matter is that this is about Trump's corruption. One of the reasons I am running is because of my age and my experience. With it comes wisdom.
Wisdom. That's Joe Biden. First thing you think of when you think of Joe Biden is wisdom, and that he's proud of his son's ill-gotten gains.
I just want to say that's a bunch of malarkey.
Let's just talk
Tim,
about that.
What father wouldn't be proud of a son who got such a high income, work from home, and yet can make millions of dollars?
You can make millions of dollars without leaving your living room.
It's an estimable achievement.
First, have your father become vice president. Then, very simple. Right. Does Michael Bloomberg have a chance at this? Because it just seems like, Biden is at the top, but it's by default. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are way over on the left. Pete Buttigieg is like 18 years old. Does Michael Bloomberg have a chance in this?
You mean the local official?
Oh, yeah, the Pete Buttigieg. That was one of my favorite things from the last debate where Buttigieg was criticizing the senators on the stage, Klobuchar and Sanders and Warren. And Klobuchar said, you should respect the 100 years of experience on this stage. I don't criticize your record as a local official. He just such a put down. It was just. So where were we? We were talking about whether Michael Bloomberg really has a chance. Scott, what do you think?
Michael Bloomberg has shown that he will commit whatever resources are necessary to see that his will is enforced. And he got the law changed in New York to get a third term as mayor because he wanted one. And I see no reason why, when his fortunes applied to becoming president of the United States, that won't give him a fighter's chance. Whether it means victory or not is another question. But
yeah, I don't know what to say about Bloomberg. He seems to me like a classic controller-in-chief, you know. He's got to control everybody's sodas and everything.
And their guns. It's gotten so bad, ladies and gentlemen, that a certain candidate's actually still considering getting in.
As I say, never say never. And I will certainly tell you I'm under enormous pressure from many, many, many people to think about it.
Enormous pressure, Hillary. Would she do it again?
That's what she just said. Why would she be talking about the enormous pressure that she's under?
Is she going to run? Is she going to run or not?
She's going to try to get drafted. That's her pathway to success.
She's going to be the candidate everybody can consolidate their support around after the first
ballot. Instead of being the one that was shoved down everybody's throat like she was last cycle, she'll be the white knight, if we can still say that, okay? And she'll come in and save the day.
You can't say that. Scott.
No, I do not think she will run. I do not.
All right, we're going to take a break, come back with one more segment, defeats and victories for individual liberty in 2019. Leesa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, and Scott Cosenza, legal affairs editor at same, LibertyNation.com. So, Scott, I don't know, do you want to start with the three biggest victories for liberty in 2019 and then leave our listeners on a downer with the defeats, or do you want to go the other way around?
I take my medicine first, Tim. Let's go with the losses, okay? Number one, perhaps the biggest, is the vaping. The war against vaping that we've seen, the demonization of vaping, which is used by many Americans to take a more healthy choice rather than smoking combustible tobacco in order to get their nicotine. And the restrictions that we've seen and again, the demonization of it, I think, has been a real loss. And the way that so many Americans seem to be willing to give up their liberty and not demand that the do-gooders present solid information if they have it to offer and let adults make up their own mind. If I was a conspiracy theorist, Tim, I might say that the big tobacco companies are against the many, many smaller vaping companies, which have yet to coalesce around, one market winner.
Okay, number two, in defeats for individual liberty in 2019.
Well, I think it's the attempt to eliminate the gig economy in California. We've seen now at the end of this year so many Californians are going to be out of a job because their job doesn't fit the notion of a W-2 income. And so whether it's Uber drivers or freelance journalists and all sorts of other people who make their money in ways that the people in Sacramento disapprove of, but do so honestly and for the benefit of positive exchange with another, I think that's a real loss. And it's a shame that the citizens of California, in spite of all that we see with their loss of civil liberties and what it means, the creation of the two societies there of rich and poor, this seems to just be another nail in that coffin.
Number three.
Tariffs, Tim. I know that we differ in this area, but I think that Donald Trump's use of tariffs to try to enforce his will on foreign countries so that they may open their markets to American goods needlessly and probably unconstitutionally discriminates against the buying wishes of the American public. It's a discrimination if you wanted to buy product A from a domestic source versus, or if you wanted to buy product B from a foreign source, to require you to pay a confiscatory tax on product B is an infringement on your liberty as an American to purchase a good or service from who you wish to.
I think we've had a terrible trade situation. and it had to be rectified. I think Trump did what he had to do, and some tariffs were applied, but I believe that now China is coming to the table. We now have USMCA. I think that's basically chump change in what's going to happen with the economy.
It's important to point out, Scott, that Trump is not tariff happy. He's using tariffs as a vehicle to get
an instrument.
China to
this discussion,
drop
Tim,
the
that we're
barriers.
having is the reason why it's on my losses list. It's because I believe the perception is that they have worked. And I don't think that's a good perception, because I think it's going to yield the increased imposition of more tariffs in the future.
I will point out that we now have an economy where there are 1.2 million,
Really? Yeah.
1.2 million more jobs than there are people to fill them.
Yeah.
All right, let's close on an up note. Victories for individual liberty in 2019. Fire away.
I think, Tim, that the biggest win is the decreasing of drug prohibition pressure across the United States, whether it comes chiefly in the form of marijuana and all the guises where it's prohibited. We've seen, as we talked about on this show before, the Safe Access Project in Philadelphia, where heroin and opioid users are being approached more as a health policy issue rather than a criminal justice policy issue. To the extent that we can retreat from that prohibition, just like the alcohol prohibition, I think it's a great win for liberty.
Number 2 on the list of victories for liberty.
Well, I think it's the success of Tulsi Gabbard. That a person whose, I think, main policy goal is to decrease our dependence on foreign wars and lust for same, as a person who's a veteran of those, I think that's a great win for liberty, because we need more of that kind of leadership to get us away from those things.
I think she's an up-and-comer. I really do. And I think she strikes a chord with the center of America.
I agree. And now, let's conclude with the final, what you consider to be triumphant victory for individual liberty in 2019.
Well,
Scott.
this is a perhaps, Tim. We'll have to see through 2020 if this develops.
This is a hopeful.
Tim, I had an interview this week with Larry Klayman, the famous lawyer who now represents George Zimmerman in the, you'll remember, of the Trayvon Martin case. And there is new information that's been alleged where the state's attorney in Florida essentially conspired with some of the attorneys and the Martin family to basically lie about the presence of a certain witness named Brittany Diamond Eugene, who was the real person that he was on the phone with. And that's important, Tim, I think, because that was the start of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it did a great deal towards adding to the racial tension in this country, which, you know, we all thought, I think, at the dawn of the Obama presidency by 2020 would be waning considerably, but seems to have only amped up. So anything that I think we can do to get away from these tribal or racial identity politics is a good thing. And if the seeds of some of that movement can be shown to have been poisoned, then I think it's a boon for liberty.
Thank you, lady and gentlemen. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, with a generous number of appearances by yours truly, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue. All of them available on LibertyNation.com anytime, anywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week in 2020. Until then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time, next year, on Liberty Nation Radio.